Paul comes in the last verses of chapter 2, verse 19 to 21, and he explains the new way of living, where the living that he is doing, the life that he has, is not a life born from the law. And this is also part of his discourse and explanation to Peter and those that were with him there. He withstood Peter to his face. He said unto them what he wanted to say unto him. And in the preceding verses, we see that he was basically saying that we as Jews know that the law doesn't work. And then he says, if we go back to the law, we are making ourselves transgressors. And then he says here from verse 19, I'm reading from verse 19 to 21 now, he says, for I, through the law, am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness came by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. Now Paul comes with such a powerful ending of chapter 2 here that we can actually spend at least another hour just talking on these three verses. But what he is saying here in verse 19 is clearly explained in depth in Romans chapter 7, where he says, for I, through the law, am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. What does he mean by that? He said, through the law, through the fact that the law could not give life to me, through the fact that the law came and actually shows the wrath of God, the fact that through the law we come to the knowledge of our sin, as explained in Romans 7, I am dead to the law. So he says the law has shown me that by my own works I can never through the law have life. Therefore I am dead to the law. He also then talks about the law, and I believe it is is incorporated there. He talks about the law also as prophesying unto Jesus. The prophets prophesying unto Jesus, Abraham, David, Isaiah, the minor prophets. And then we see Jesus Christ coming forth. And what he's saying is, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. So what he is saying is that Jesus Christ came, and when he came to make an end to Jew and Gentile. Now, in order to really understand what's going on in Galatians 2:19 and 20, you have to have a very good understanding of Romans 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, basically up to 10. But the core of this, which he's talking about here when he says, I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, and when he says that through the law I'm dead to the law, is found in Romans, I would say the second part of chapter 1 and then all of chapter 2, wherein he says that through the law is clearly said, Romans 2:19, that no flesh shall be justified by the works of the law. That is what the law is communicating. That is what the law is saying. And then in those chapters, both Jew and Gentile is found as sinners. The Gentiles are sinners, for they've made false gods. They never believed upon God. They rejected God. The Jews are sinners because when God appeared to them and they wanted to worship God, they never kept the law. They never did the right thing. So through the law, so we find these two people groups, the Jews and the Gentiles, and both of them are sinners. Then Jesus Christ came, and when he was crucified upon the cross, he died as the sinner man. The sinner, that's what he died as. And when he died, because both Jew and both Gentile were both found as under sin, and when Jesus died, it meant that the sinner Jew and the sinner Gentile died, that there is therefore now no more Jew and no more Gentile. And then when Jesus Christ was raised up, that there is only one life left, and that is Jesus Christ and to be in him. And as we rely upon him, we are found to be in him by believing upon him. Glory to God. And as we believe upon him, this is what he says, and this is the conclusion Paul makes in verse 20, I am crucified with Christ. He says, nevertheless I live. So he says, I have not physically died. He says, I see that the man which found his justification by the law died. And the man that sought life by worshipping idols, he also died. And that the only life there is in the resurrected Jesus. So he says, I am crucified with Christ, for I am dead to the law through the law. The law has shown me my inability. The law has shown me that I cannot obey the law and that I need somebody to save this body from its death, Romans 7. And then he says, I'm crucified with Christ. The way I see his crucifixion is, I see the Jewish man has died there. Nevertheless, I am alive, yet not I, but Christ that lives in me. So he says now, this new life I live, the life I am now living, the holy life I live, I don't walk after the customs of Moses anymore. The life I now live, I don't live by circumcision. I don't live by the customs of Moses. I don't live it by obedience to the law. I'm not even trying to obey the 10th commandment. I'm not doing any of those things. He says the holy life I now live is actually a result of the rulership of Christ over sin and death. And that is what is manifesting in me. It's Christ living in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by, in other words, the physical life I live in the flesh, which they would say he is a Jew. He says, the life I live in the flesh. Because these Jewish people didn't know how to live life in the flesh. They thought, well, now we are Jews, we get saved. Their whole identity, all their life was in their ethnicity, and that they've been given the law, that they've been given the customs of Moses, and so forth. Now that Jesus Christ has come, what are we to do now? How shall we live now? Shall we go to the temple? What shall we do? Our whole world has fallen apart. And now Paul comes and he says, well, I'm actually dead to that whole old way of living. I'm completely dead to that, for it could not produce life in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, this physical life you see me living here, I am living it by a revelation of the resurrection of Christ and what that means. That's why I'm preaching to the Gentile. That's why I say there is no more Jew, no more Gentile, male, female, none of those things, slave or free. All people are the same, for I have a new reality, a new truth whereon I base my life, and this reality and this new truth is powerful and is producing the life that I am living. It says here, the life I live in the flesh, I live by the faith or the faithfulness of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. And then he ends it off by actually saying what is truly going on in Galatia, truly going on in Antioch, truly of what was going on in Jerusalem and everything. He says, I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness came by the law, then Christ died in vain. So what he's actually saying is, I don't want to frustrate, I don't want to block, I don't want to stop, I don't want to hinder this influential power that God has by Jesus Christ. Because, and this is what he says, he's actually saying, and now he's getting deeper into this thing, which we're going to see, especially in chapter 5 and 6, chapter 5 especially, where he's saying, we don't want to frustrate the grace of God. We don't want to bring a hindrance to the influential power of God, for by grace are we saved. So we don't want to hinder the power that's bringing forth salvation from sin and death. And what he's saying is, I am not going to hinder this powerful love of God that brings forth a new life in me by going back to Judaism, by going back to the circumcision, or preaching any of that. For that makes me a transgressor, that makes me not to partake in what God has come and brought for us. Well, that is the end of Galatians chapter 2.